Okay, so today we'll be covering two main grants. Right, so government strategy, why are we planting all these trees? It's all part of the England Trees Action Plan, which is supported by the Nature for Climate Fund. It's the government's long-term vision to create a treescape for 2050. They have a target of creating 30,000 hectares of woodland a year. That's across the whole of the UK. And DEFRA and FC are to deliver these targets. It's also part of the government strategy to become net zero by 2050. And woodland creation will continue to be funded through WCPG, which will transition into elms in the future.
Oh. Holly, you've gone on to mute for some reason.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, it's just at the start of that slide.
So the Woodland Creation Planning Grant. So the Woodland Creation Planning Grant provides funding to landowners and land managers and public bodies, excluding Forestry England, to help cover the costs of producing a UK forestry standard compliant woodland creation plan. It enables applicants to assess the suitability of their land for woodland creation, ensures you're planting the right tree in the right place, supports applicants to other funding sources, so you can use this grant to then go ahead and apply for the England Woodland Creation Offer. It's a standalone grant and there's no obligation to plant once your planning grant has been approved, and it's ideal for more larger and more complex sites. And there's up to £30,000 per site available. Eligibility. So you must plan to create woodland that is minimum 5 hectares or more in size, and each block must meet the definition of woodlands set out by the National Forestry Inventory. So that's a minimum area of 0.5 hectares and a minimum width of 20 metres. And there must be potential to achieve at least 20% canopy cover. And it's open to all landowners, land managers, and public bodies. So how it works? So the funding will support you to gather and analyse the information that you need to make sure your proposal takes into account the following. So biodiversity, so we've got priority habitats, SSSIs, birds such as lapwings, and then landscape, so landscape character, views, water, will it affect water quality, or are you planning to plant on a main river floodplain? Historic environment, so archaeological features, listed buildings. Stakeholders, so we've got Natural England, Environment Agency, national parks, AUNBs, utility companies, neighbours, can be a whole host of people that are either directly involved with your site or surrounding the site. And then the site itself. So what are the site characteristics? You've got to think about soil type, soil depth. Is the site wet, dry, and is it north facing, south facing? Oh. So this is just an overview of the Woodland Creation Planning Grant process. So you'll send us in an application with your proposed site map, and then the stage 1, and then there's stage 2, and then there's supplementary funding and is up to 70% for any supplementary surveys that may be required. But we'll go into these in a little bit more detail. So sending in your application, basic checks, send in your application to us. So we'll do desk-based research on receipt of the application. We also have a policy and advice team. We'll feedback on ecology, heritage, landscape, soil, water, deer and social, and we'll highlight any showstoppers earlier. Is there woodland creation possible on the site? And if there is, we'll go ahead to stage 1. So in stage 1, it involves a site visit with the Woodland Creation Officer and feedback from the policy and advice team. Stage 1 will involve conducting desk-based research, so identifying any constraints and opportunities for woodland creation on the site, early consultation on heritage and ecology. That will usually be through Historic England, your local heritage team and Natural England. And then complete stage 1 of the Woodland Creation Design Plan template and submit any supporting documents, such as a complete site context plan. And then you'll receive £1,000 for completion of stage 1. And then this will, so if you go and you get stage 1 and it's confirmed and yes, it's good opportunity, it will go through to stage 2. This is just an example of a site context plan, and examples of these maps can be found on the internet, but I will send you around the links to these later. Surveys and supplementary payments. So stage 1 will highlight the need for any surveys and if they qualify for supplementary payments. We'll fund up to 70% of the cost towards these surveys. Application and quotes are submitted with stage 1 documents, with the surveys undertaken at stage 2, the next stage. And these can include a wide range of features to be surveyed, so peat depth, heritage, landscape and water, and if you've got any priority habitats, species. Oh, there we go. And there's a nice little picture of soil for you, peat depth. Right, stage 2. So if there is potential for planting at your site, then you'll be offered a stage 2 payment. So you'll complete stage 2 of the Woodland Creation Design Plan template, and this includes a site appraisal plan and a final design concept plan. Survey results and stakeholder engagement will be used at this stage to work up a final design. Stage 2 payment is £150 per hectare, minus £1,000 offered at stage 1. And if your application is under 10 hectares in size, we'll make a minimum payment of £500 for stage 2. Here we go, and this is just an example of a site appraisal plan. And this is a design concept plan. Is everybody okay so far? Silence, okay. Right, we'll now move on to the England Woodland Creation Offer. So this is the Forestry Commission's flagship grant for woodland creation in England, and it's one of a suite of Forestry Commission initiatives to support woodland creation and tree planting across England. So EWCO, as we like to call it for short, applies to any land managers regardless of potential objectives. So your objectives can be for creating woodland for wildlife, income through firewood or timber, improving productivity on your land, so creating shelter belts for stock and crops, farm diversification, and aesthetics, so landscaping. There is a 15-year obligation period for this grant. Eligibility. So all the land that you want to plant or want to go ahead with EWCO must be in England. Land must be free of existing grant schemes or only have 5 months left of their current scheme. You may want to leave your scheme earlier to apply for EWCO, but be aware, in some cases, the landowner may have to pay back payments that have already been given. Minimum application size is 1 hectare, but this can be split into smaller blocks, and the minimum is 0.1 hectares per block, with a minimum width of 20 metres, but this can be reduced to 10 metres for riparian planting or for shelter belts. So if you've got a landowner with awkward field corners, or they don't have an area of land of a hectare that they want to put down for trees, then it can be reduced in size. It can fit around the landowner's landscape. So all proposals must be UKFS compliant, and the land must be registered with the RPA, so that's the Rural Payments Agency, before submitting an application. So EWCO does not cover any woodland creation proposals for legal purposes, so for restocking or for planning agreements. Cannot pay for existing tree cover. You can have a few, but that'll, if you do have, bigger areas of tree cover, that will be taken out of your final area. Does not include short rotation coppicing, so Christmas trees. You can't grant stack, so the land can't be under countryside stewardship and EWCO, for instance, and livestock must be excluded for the agreement length. Although for management purposes, this may be tailored, but you'll have to discuss that with your woodland officer. So EWCO supports natural colonisation. So natural colonisation is a woodland creation technique that relies on natural processes to create woodland. The land must be within 75 metres of a viable seed source of at least 2 tree species. Sites can, sorry, do we have a question? No? Okay. So sites can be adjacent to woodland or mature hedgerows. Non-native species in appropriate locations will qualify, and ash will be treated as a viable species to establish resistant genotypes. The grant does require that by year 10, 60% of the area of natural colonisation is under woody cover with a stocking of tree species of at least 100 stems per hectare. Woody cover is defined as being any species listed in the EWCO application form Part B. That can be found towards the back of the Part B application form. And then by year 10, if it shows that remedial work is needed, so it hasn't reached that 100 stems per hectare, you can take remedial work, so planting extra trees the following season. And here we go, we've got just a little diagram of natural regeneration versus natural colonisation. So natural regeneration is usually happens where there is already a woodland, while natural colonisation is where the land has not been covered in woodland in the previous 20 years. So the standard cost, so the costs available for capital items are generous compared to other schemes available. You can receive up to £10,200 a hectare to create your woodland. This covers nearly 100% of schemes. This obviously depends on, what fencing you're going for and how many trees you're putting in. Standard costs cover planting, boundary management, so fencing, vegetation management such as weeding, the provision of drinking water for stock. So if you fenced off a stream, then you can put in water troughs. And there, on the EWCO forms page, you will find a breakdown of all the standard costs and how much it is for, fencing, post and sheep netting, deer fencing, tree shelters. Annual maintenance payment, so you receive a total of £3,500 per hectare for maintenance for 10 years. So the obligation period is 15 years, but at the moment the annual maintenance payments is for 10 years. And maintenance payments are there to cover replacing any trees that die, repairing fencing that's been damaged, weeding, and then eventually removing those tree shelters if there are any. And then just to note that the first 5 years of the annual maintenance payments will be paid automatically. You will then need to claim again for payments in years 6 to 10. Don't forget to do that. So WCO also covers infrastructure costs. So up to 40% of infrastructure costs are covered to support future management, and up to 100% for recreational infrastructure. So this is for tracks. So if you're extracting timber, gates and bridges for walkers. So be aware that these payments will be capped at 10% of the total capital cost of your proposal, or 5% of the remaining WCO budget. And then that'll be worked out of whichever is lower. Additional contributions. Now, this is the part that sets WCO aside from other grants out there. So it's based on location, mapped areas where each payment can be claimed. The design may need to be changed to become eligible for the additional contributions. We'll go into a little bit more detail in that later. And then the lump sum payment made when capital works has been completed. And it's for providing public goods, essentially. So what are these additional contributions? So we've got nature recovery at the top, and this is split into 2 sections. So we've got the higher nature recovery payment, which is £2,800 a hectare, and then we've got the lower payment of £1,100 a hectare. So this payment is available where woodland creation will expand areas of existing priority woodland, create areas of new native woodland, or extend habitat for red squirrel populations. And support for these activities will help woodland-dependent species recover. And then we've got riparian planting through protected river corridors, which is at £1,600 a hectare. Improve water quality, available where woodland creation will help reduce pollutants through land use change that reduces fertilizer applications, runoff, and intercepts sediment before it reaches a watercourse, and that's £400 a hectare. And then we have a close to settlements payment, social payment, available where woodland creation will provide social and environmental benefits by being close to people. Flood risk management, available where it will reduce flood risk. And then at the bottom, we have recreational access. And this is available where woodland creation will provide long-term permissive access for recreation on areas of land where there is currently no access. So we won't go into all of them in detail because it's available in the WCO grant manual. I've just picked a few out. So nature recovery. So this is available where woodland, the higher rate is available where the new woodland will expand areas of existing native woodland with new native woodland. So at the bottom of the screen, you can see that dark green area, that's that higher rate. And then the lower rate available where you're planting woodland that's not touching existing woodland is that grey area there. That covers pretty much nearly all of England. So what are the requirements? So your species mix must be at least 80% native, have a minimum of 5 species, and no more than 50% of the mix can be allocated to one species. 30% must be small trees and shrubs. And then stocking density, it's a minimum of 1,600 stems a hectare, then a maximum of 2,500. And then open space is a really important element. So depending on the size of your woodland, so if you're under 5 hectares, then we're looking at a minimum open space of between 10 and 20%. And then if it's over 5 hectares, a maximum of 40%. But this will have to be discussed with the woodland officer. Close to settlement payment. So this area and you areas, and it must be within 40% of the most deprived areas in England, and within 4 kilometres of built-up areas with a population of 10,000 or more, or be within 1 kilometre of built-up areas with a population of 2,000 or more. So if you're thinking, how have they worked out that social area? That's how. And then with the social payment, the recreational access payment sort of joint to it. So £2,200 available where the woodland meets the requirements of the social close to settlements contribution. So the recreational access payments are only available in those, if I go back, in those pink areas, in those social areas. And the access must be maintained for 30 years. So the obligation period of the grant is 15 years, but access must be maintained for 30 years. And then access must be available over the whole area that you've put forward for this additional contribution, and it must be advertised, so way markers or signs at the beginning of the path. If you are outside the social spatial targeting area and you're in an area that's used quite heavily, frequently by people, so people use it to go to A to B, you can fill in the public access eligibility form to say why you should have that recreational access payment. So just bear that in mind. So if you are outside the social area, don't write off recreational access altogether. And then with the biodiversity payment, so all these additional payments are stackable. If you wanted to have the social, recreational, water quality and the higher biodiversity payment, you would have to, your specifications would have to meet the higher diversity additional payment. But if you just wanted to go for the social payment, it's a maximum of 50% of a single species, 30% small shrubs and trees again, and the stocking density is 1,100 stems. And open space is a max of 40%. And here we go. And you can look at these specs. They're here, there we go, in the grant manual. If you wanted to search where these additional contribution layers are, you can go onto the Forestry Commission map browser, the land information search. So within the map layers, select targeting and scoring. Scroll in, because they won't pop up unless you're quite close, so you're zoomed in, and then select the WCO layers. So there we've got the WCO Biodiversity Priority Habitat Network. And if you scroll down, all the options will be there. So this is just a little example. So if you wanted to check what could possibly qualify for your land and how it would work, I've just selected a random area of the map. So you see I'll put a red boundary around some fields. So say they were considering woodland creation in that area. So what have we got in that area? We've got a watercourse, we have woodland, ancient woodland, there's steep ground, and there's public access to the left. So they're considering 8 hectares of new woodland planting. So down the bottom, they're going to be putting in a riparian buffer. And then at the top, they're going to link those two existing woodlands with a wildlife corridor. So here we can see that in that area, that pink layer, that's the social payment. So as long as your woodland creation block is touching the layers, it doesn't have to be all in it, then all that land in that green hash will be eligible for that social payment. And then we've got the biodiversity priority habitat. So we see by Hilliers Down and Wood, there's that higher biodiversity spatial area in the dark green. So then yet again, it's touching it. So all that area will be eligible. I will say that it'll be up until a certain point. If you've only got half a hectare and you're planning on 100 hectares, at some point there will be a cut-off point, but this can be discussed with Woodland Officer. And then we've got flood risk management in the brown. So altogether, eligible for close to settlements, £4,000, biodiversity higher payment, £22,400, and then flood risk management at £4,000, and then public access. So say they wanted to put public access into that point. So I've mapped off that little section. It's 2 hectares minus the part that's already got the footpath going through. So if they just wanted to put that forward for recreational access, that would be £4,400. And then for that 8 hectares of planting, they're going to receive a total of £34,800. So what's next? Going to go ahead with either Woodland Creation Planning Grant or WCPG. So first of all, it's important to know what the landowner wants from the woodland and does it fit into the characteristics of that site. The objectives to create wildlife habitat, produce timber, create shelter belts for livestock, create additional habitat for game birds, whole host of objectives, but what are they? Make sure you know what you want to get out of that woodland. And then what are the site characteristics? So the soil and the climate of your site will influence what species of trees you will be able to grow alongside designations such as AONBs and pests. So is there a large amount of deer in that area? And then your objectives and your site characteristics will shape the design of your woodland and what species you plant. For instance, if you're in a particularly wet area and you're wanting to put in high productive conifers which don't like the wet, then you may have to rethink that. So considerations, there are a whole host of them. These may impact the location and design of your woodland. Us at the Forest Commission or other bodies will let you know if there are any showstoppers. Designations, we've gone through them before, but areas of outstanding natural beauty, nature reserves, triple SIs. Is there priority habitat there? Presence of peat, yet again, heritage features, agricultural land quality. So if you're wanting to create a large woodlands at landscape scale on grade 1, 2, or 3A land, it may be very difficult because we've also got to consider food security. Of course, you can plant on grade 1, 2, and 3A land if you've got certain pockets, but if it's going to be large, vast swathes, discuss that with us first. And then think about public access, maintaining rights of way through there, and then pests. So think about disease, deer, rabbits, hares, and then will that impact, what fencing, tree shelters you're going to have to think about for that site. Site surveys. So if there are any designations, protected sites, or features, indications of peat, priority habitat, historic environment features, so on, surveys are likely to be needed. We will not normally expect you to fund surveys, simply to look for features of interest. However, if a stakeholder provides enough reason to suggest that a feature may be present and may be adversely affected by the woodland proposal, you might need to undertake a survey to establish the likely significance of any effect. You should not undertake any surveys until you've discussed and agreed them with your woodland officer. We do have in-house ecologists and historic environment advisors. So, who to contact? So if you have any of these features on the site, here's a list. So designations, we've got Natural England, RSPB, National Park, AONB, Priority Habitat and Species, Natural England again, RSPB, and your local environment record centre. Pete, contact your Woodland Creation Officer or Natural England. Public rights of way, local authority. Landscape, so whoever's in charge of that, protected landscape, if it's a national park, local authority. Historic environment, your Historic Environmental Record Centre. And then water, we've got the Environment Agency, local authority, and again, your Woodland Creation Officer. Before you submit an application, you should send a letter of your outlining your proposal to your local environment record centre and your historic environment record centre. And then this is just an overview of the grant process. Just to conclude, so consider opportunities, your constraints, set clear objectives, then contact your local woodland officer or seek professional help through an agent or a consultant. So apply for the Woodland Creation Planning Grant. This is optional. And then if you think, oh, I'm just going to go straight for EWCO, contact Historical Environment, Local Environment Record Centre. And then once you've applied, we'll do our due diligence, put your proposal up to public consultation. It'll be on the public register for 28 days for anyone to comment on the design, on the proposal. And then you'll have a EWCO decision whether, yes, you can go ahead. It says 3 to 5 months there, but every site is different. It could take longer. Just be aware of that. We covered this in a previous session. The webinar will be sent out, the recorded video, but important to get to know the UK forestry standards. So this is essentially the highway code for woodland creation in the UK, and it ensures sustainable forest management, takes into account climate change, biodiversity, and the protection of water resources. And then support for woodland creation. So the FC, we offer support and guidance through your woodland creation project. We can signpost you to free support, but that will be you. That will be the local authorities, the UCAF funded organisations. And then here we got the Southwest Woodland Creation mailbox. So if you've got any queries on the site, send an email into there. And then this was a list of useful links to use. I will send out this presentation afterwards. And here we go. Q&A time. I hope that wasn't too boring. there we go. I'll
Thanks,
keep
Polly.
the
So we managed to, I think we covered quite a few questions that came up in the chat, but there's a couple we can probably go back to. But I guess, yeah, if there's any other questions coming in, please put your hand up and we can pick them up. Just to cover the couple in the chat. So the first question from Naomi about using the creation planning grant on land that is already partially forested. We kind of get this situation a lot on the estates and farms we work with, and that we have some areas come forward for woodland creation, i.e. bare fields and open land, and that goes through to the planning grant or straight to WCO. But then any farms, estates that have existing woodland and forestry on their site, on their land, they quite often will go into a woodland management plan and potentially go forward to countryside stewardship higher tier after that. So if you have existing woodland that you'd like to get into a management plan, there is a £1,500 grant as well to go through that process, as long as you've got over 3 hectares of woodland. And the other question was, sorry, was there a question just then?
Yeah, there was. There was just I've got a site that I've been looking at, which is kind of half potential planting land and half existing, let's say, conifer woodland. And what would you recommend on that sort of?
Is the existing conifer woodland over 3 hectares?
Yes, I would imagine it is. At a guess.
So it's likely to be a good candidate to go forward to the management plan, and depending on what your aims are for that site, or possibly what species are in the landscape, or what, if there's any designations on the site, the management plan will sort of help set the targets for that woodland going forward. So it has sort of it's a 100-year vision really, but a sort of a 20-year plan. But within that, there's a 10-year sort of obligation period where you will undertake felling or management within that wood. Quite often, if they're conifer woods, if they're not looking at being a productive conifer wood going forwards, maybe they're looking at reverting more to native broadleaf, then as part of that management plan, we would work with you to sort of select what species should be either restocked or be allowed to naturally regenerate through there. So equally, if it's a productive woodland, or quite often if it's a public access woodland, actually conifer fits really well with that. We'd just work with you to work out what species would be best for that as well, and also try and help you release some finance for that woodland if you're looking at doing any timber harvesting.
I think that's it. It's a mixture with that, and there's a whole site which has got some grassland that they're trying to make into chalk grassland, and then there's some open land, and so there's a bit of everything on the patch. So it might require one of each.
Yeah, absolutely. And what either the woodland officer or the woodland creation officer would do once out on site, and also as part of a desk study, is look at those areas of where you've got open grassland as well, and try and make an assessment on what is actually either semi-improved or really good quality semi-improved or potentially priority habitat, so areas we wouldn't plant. Try and separate that out from areas which are actually suitable for planting up. So try and make a bit more of a sort of whole farm plan.
Could I just add to that, Naomi, that if you're looking to create a sort of mosaic of habitats, then it's important to remember that WCO, although the minimum scheme size has to be a hectare, it can be made up of 0.1 hectare blocks. So that would really sort of allow you to have that opportunity to create a couple.
Super. And just the other question, again from Naomi, was about using planning grant with biodiversity net gain mitigation schemes. So we're unable to use the planning grant and also any of our grant schemes on areas which have already been proposed for offset for planning permission. So whether it's funded already through a biodiversity net gain, or potentially if it's not funded but as part of a planning permission, that land has been required to be returned to a certain state, then our grant system can't actually be used on those areas. Where planning grant can be used is if you've got just an open area of land that hasn't got any sort of requirements on it already. We could do the assessment through the planning grant on what would be the UKFS compliant woodland for that site. Once it's all approved and you've got a good design in place, you can then put that forward to a biodiversity net gain scheme to say, we've got this site and we could potentially offset this number of credits. It's a very emerging area for us, and we haven't actually got to a point yet where we've actually got a scheme coming forward like this, but over the course of this year we certainly expect to, and yeah, it could be a really nice way of actually pairing up where we want to create woodland and actually the finance available to do so. Okay.
Have most of the questions in the chat been answered? It looks like you two have been very busy, James and Neil.
Yeah, there was a question about livestock within an agreement area, which is an interesting one, and it sort of it's perhaps an unsatisfactory answer that I've provided, that at the moment we're not able to offer livestock within an agreement area, but obviously the expectation is that WCO will be slotting into the mid-tier of ELM, which was going to be LNR, which is local nature recovery, but is now going to be called enhanced campsite stewardship or campsite stewardship plus. And with that, we're improving a lot of our offers. I think probably the writing on the wall is that agroforestry is going to be an important part of our incentives going forward, and you know, it's not ideal that we can't offer livestock within the agreement area at the moment, but it will certainly be part of our going forward. And I'm just sorry that I can't give you more details. And there was one other question that I answered regarding capital payment for Japanese knotweed. That's an interesting one, and if I had a magic wand, I would definitely hover it over that question, because I deal with Japanese knotweed a lot, and it's incredibly invasive, especially around catchments. But unfortunately, the capital item that WCO pays for is bracken removal, because this acts as a huge impediment for actually getting trees established and planted. And the payment rate for that, if you're interested, is I've got it here.
James,
yeah,
could you move your microphone down? I think.
Oh, sorry.
I
hadn't realised I'd pushed my glasses up and managed to move it. Yeah, so the payment rate for bracken is, there's two payment rates. It's either chemical bracken control at £270 per hectare, or mechanical bracken control at £190 per hectare. And also, interestingly, something that we come across a lot in the southwest is gorse, but we wouldn't fund the removal of that because it's a native scrub species, sorry, that you know, supports important biodiversity. So something to consider. Right.
Related to that, what are the recommendations if there is Japanese knotweed on the site where we want to have a WCO application?
Yeah, so it is funded under Countryside Stewardship mid-tier from Natural England as a capital item, but unfortunately we don't do it. I mean, if, say, for example, we go back to the conifer block that is on the land that's potentially a planting site, if you did get a management plan, that would then act as a gateway for further funding. And the further funding that would really help in that instance would be woodland improvement. And there is a capital payment within woodland improvement to deal with invasives. I can't remember the number. There's a whole suite of numbers for capital items. But really, the best way to deal with Japanese knotweed is to have a joined up approach with partners further up the catchment, because that's where the seed source is coming from. So, you know, if you can come up with this coherent plan with neighbours, then that goes a long way to dealing with it. And then, you know, people on the ground pulling it is the best approach. But sadly, it's very, very difficult to get rid of.
Now, keep going back to the questions in the chat, but there's one also about whether Woodland Creation Planning Grant applicants, whether they tend to use agents or not, and I'd say the majority do. Probably a good 2/3, 3/4 of the agreements we get are all done through agents. Of the rest, then some are done by landowners, but I would just raise a caution that there's a hell of a lot of time investment in doing a creation planning grant, and if you're going through it for the first time, you can sort of multiply that amount of time up tenfold. It is quite a not necessarily a tricky process to go through, but you do need a quite a decent forestry knowledge and knowledge of our grant system to be able to make it work. The other areas we're getting applications through from some of the delivery partners, so places like Forest for Cornwall are now sort of have upskilled so that they're at the point of being able to help landowners with putting creation planning grants in. So with this group, if that's something that sort of you'd be sort of keen to do in the future, almost acting as that agent, then that could be potentially something we can provide a bit more training on in terms of working through the planning grant specifically.
Thanks, Neil. Looks like we've got another question coming in. Oh,
I've just seen the comment about please can you move your microphone down a bit. That's hilarious. There was also another question regarding for me, which I answered, which was about flood risk layering, and if your site isn't eligible, doesn't sit within that. Just to say that the flood risk management layer, spatial targeting layer, was amended on the 31st of December in 22, and the area that it covers has been reduced quite substantially, and so it's much more targeted. But I think, as I've put in the answer, that if you can gain support from your lead local flood authority or catchment sensitive farming officers, then we'd very look at it in a very decent light, because it's supported by their objectives. So it doesn't mean that just because it doesn't sit in the spatial targeting layer that it's not an option. And that's something that you would discuss with your woodland officer when you put together your application. And I'm very happy to discuss it with you further if you'd like.
thank you, James. Any more questions before I stop the recording, but we'll continue to have a discussion? No?